Something is off with people born between 1993 and 1998. They don't fully relate to millennials, they don't fully fit Gen Z, and they know it. This is the Zillennial identity crisis no one names. Old enough to remember dial-up tones, young enough to master TikTok algorithms. They grew up analog, they matured digital, they exist in between, and that in-between changes psychology. Here's the strange part. They were raised on optimism. Follow your passion. College guarantees stability. The late 90s still believed in linear success. Then 2008 happened. Financial collapse. Parents stressed. Degrees losing value. Behavioral research shows early economic instability reshapes risk tolerance. It creates caution. It creates vigilance. So they adapted. They learned to observe before acting. They learned to save before spending. They learned to question before trusting. Not lazy. Strategic. Not entitled. Skeptical. Not confused. Calibrating. But socially, something else happened. They had childhood without smartphones. Bikes outside. Unfiltered conversations. Embarrassment that disappeared. Then adolescence arrived with social media. Instagram became identity. Snapchat became validation. Online reputation became permanent. Psychologists call this dual-stage socialization. Analog childhood. Digital adolescence. 2 rulebooks. 1 brain. This creates hyper-awareness. They understand offline nuance. They understand online optics. They monitor both. 9 years old. Playing outside. 16 years old. Curating a profile. 22 years old. Building LinkedIn authority. Constant adaptation. But here's the paradox. They crave stability like millennials. They distrust systems like Gen Z. They hustle like neither. They watched older siblings struggle with debt. They watched younger peers monetize attention. They stand in the middle, calculating. And this is where it gets interesting. When a generation doesn't belong fully anywhere, it becomes observational. They read rooms faster. They detect shifts earlier. They sense instability quickly. In high-conflict environments, this becomes an advantage. But socially, it creates tension. Too serious for Gen Z humor. Too ironic for millennial sincerity. Too self-aware to relax. These people don't feel lost. They feel miscategorized. And miscategorization creates quiet identity friction. Not loud rebellion. Silent recalibration. The question isn't whether they struggle. The question is what this split identity is doing to their behavior long-term. Because the surface looks stable, but underneath, something more strategic is forming. Here's what most people miss. This identity split doesn't create weakness, it creates pattern recognition. They grew up during transition, Facebook in middle school, Instagram in high school, economic instability in college, constant environmental shifts. Behavioral science shows unpredictable environments sharpen adaptive intelligence. The brain learns to scan, to anticipate, to adjust quickly. They became early adapters. They saw influencers before brands did. They saw remote work before companies did. They saw burnout before managers did. Not visionary, observant, not rebellious, responsive, not detached, analytical. But there's a cost. When your formative years demand constant adjustment, stability feels temporary, jobs feel fragile, relationships feel conditional, institutions feel unreliable. So they don't overcommit. They test first. They measure first. They calculate first. Concrete example. First job out of college. Open office. Startup energy. Free snacks. Big promises. 6 months later. Layoffs. They watched this happen. More than once. Psychologists call this anticipatory detachment. Staying emotionally prepared for collapse. It looks like low loyalty. It's actually risk management. Here's the paradox. They crave belonging, but they don't trust permanence. They want community, but they keep backup options. Not avoidant, strategic, not cynical, pattern-based. And this changes social behavior. They don't overshare online. They don't overspend socially. They don't over-identify with labels. Millennials built identities around ideals. Gen Z builds identities around expression. Zillennials build identities around positioning, career positioning, social positioning, emotional positioning. They read generational discourse like analysts. They know when trends shift. They know when humor changes. They know when culture pivots. Because they had to learn both systems. Analog sincerity, digital performance. But here's where it gets interesting. Living between systems creates subtle exhaustion, constant self-monitoring, constant recalibration, constant awareness of optics. They don't collapse loudly. They quietly optimize. In high-pressure environments, this makes them reliable. In relationships, it makes them cautious. In leadership, it makes them strategic. But over time, something happens. When you always prepare for instability, you struggle to relax into security. Opportunities feel temporary. Success feels provisional. Peace feels fragile. This isn't a loud crisis. It's a low-grade tension. And most people misread it. They call them indecisive. They call them detached. They call them overthinking. But this isn't confusion. It's adaptation layered over uncertainty. The real question is, what happens when a generation trained for instability enters long-term power? Because adaptation scales, and so does controlled skepticism. Now zoom out. The oldest Zillennials are entering leadership tracks, management roles, founding teams, and they carry this dual wiring with them. They don't trust hype cycles. They don't trust blind loyalty. They don't trust permanent promises, because they've seen collapse before commitment. Here's the strange part. This makes them unusually calm in chaos. Market drops, platform shifts, corporate restructuring. They've trained for instability since adolescence. Not fearless, prepared, not optimistic, measured, not rigid, flexible. Behavioral research shows early exposure to volatility increases strategic patience. You don't panic, you reposition. So when cultural narratives swing, they don't swing with them. They assess first. They observe patterns. They wait for confirmation. But there's a trade-off. When skepticism becomes default, inspiration becomes muted. They hesitate to believe fully. They hesitate to attach deeply. They hesitate to declare identity strongly. This is the hidden tension. They are highly adaptive, but adaptation blurs self-definition. Millennials had a collective story. Gen Z has a loud voice. Zillennials have a quiet calculus. And this is where it gets important. Generations shape culture through dominant traits. If millennials brought idealism, and Gen Z brings disruption, Zillennials bring calibration. They refine systems. They stress test ideas. They filter noise. In unstable economies, this becomes powerful. In polarized societies, this becomes stabilizing. But personally, the identity question remains. Who are you when you've mastered adaptation? When you've learned every platform, understood every shift, prepared for every downturn? Psychologists call this adaptive overcompensation. The skill that protects you can limit you. If everything is strategic, spontaneity feels unsafe. If everything is provisional, commitment feels risky. Not broken, conditioned, not lost, between cycles, not invisible, underestimated. This generation isn't confused. It's transitional. Raised at the end of one world, activated at the beginning of another. The real power of Zillennials isn't loud identity, it's pattern awareness. And the real risk isn't instability. It's never choosing a stable center. So here's the question. Are they going to stay permanently adaptive, or define something that isn't reactive? Because generations that sit between eras often shape both. If you were born between 1993 and 1998, you already know this tension. You feel it in career moves, in relationships, in long-term decisions. The algorithm won't name it, but you just heard it. And now the only variable left is awareness. If this felt familiar, if you've ever felt between worlds, not fully claimed by either side, this channel is for you. Subscribe for more psychological breakdowns like this. And if you want to support the work, consider becoming a member. I genuinely appreciate you being here.